Welcome back, AP. Welcome back to it. Welcome back to your flipped classroom and our continuing discussion of the causes overall of World War I, right? The intricate causes that literally the College Board on the curriculum just says, discuss the intricate causes. I could teach an entire course about the causes of World War I. A woman named Barbara Tuchman wrote an entire book about this, right? I find it hilarious that they're like, just make sure they know that it was hard to understand. Now, anyway, well, going into it, though, we left off in class talking about something very, very important, the core distrust that leads to alliance systems growing inside of Europe. And that core distrust being, of course, between France and Germany, right? And we left off talking about Alsace-Lorraine and second wave industrialism and what that means and stuff like that, and also discussing how the Krupp family is a great example of second wave industrialism and how the Germans really what's the word I'm looking for? Really grasped onto that and like really grew along with that second wave industrialism. Because if we look at this graph down here that's actually sitting right there, this is something I didn't get to quite in class. You can see very closely, like right there, that kind of goldenrod color right here, that is the industrialization of Germany. And notice the industrialization of France. Right around the late 1800s, leading into the 1900s, the Germans severely passed the French in industrialization. And when you pass them in industrialization and you start making big guns like this from the Krupp family, that means you can make tons of money, and you can also grow monetarily and militarily using those funds, right? So going forward, what you have to understand is imperialism is going to be another big cause behind this as well, because Germany and France will compete for raw material producing colonies, okay? But what's going to happen now is I'm going to clip in a flip that I used last year. I kid you not, I made this last year. It's quality stuff. There's a shark in it, there's sound effects. It's so good. So please listen to this flip, enjoy, and see why I think French sharks might be the cutest and funniest thing that you've ever heard in your entire life. But I will see y'all soon. Watch this bad boy, answer the Google Doc stuff at the very, very end, and I'll see y'all soon. Y'all have a good one. Okay, but getting into it, though, let's continue along with that alliances perspective, right? We're going to be bringing up some old characters and some new characters in this entire discussion, so get ready, get them highlighters out, get those pens ready to rock. Let's keep talking, right? But first and foremost, the causes of World War I, going along the alliance vein, how do we prevent a war? Now, yet again, for the 100th time, Otto von Bismarck out here, the Lorax himself is playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers, right? So following the unification of Germany by 1871, Otto von Bismarck is going to realize that he has made himself a nice little enemy, right? That the Germans and the German Empire have made themselves an enemy by the way of France, right? Because they are, of course, going to end up in possession of Alsace-Lorraine, the Franco-Prussian War coming to such a cataclysmic end where they literally forced a bunch of people in Paris to eat zoo animals and stuff like that, is going to lead to some strife within the continent, right? So to prevent a war, he decides with himself, I need to make a geographical alliance that will actually demonstrate large-scale powers to make Germany almost uninvadable, right? We need to make it so that France, if they cop an attitude with us, will have the full might hammer of the German Empire come down upon them, and we're not going to do it just by ourselves. We're going to make an alliance to make it look like we are the biggest, baddest guys on the block that should not be messed with, right? Well, the French are going to be like, oh, not so fast, but we'll get to that part here in a couple of minutes, right? Now, how do you prevent a war, right? Well, the way that he's going to decide to prevent this war is by creating an alliance known as the Alliance of Three Emperors. And that alliance is going to last from about 1873 to 1891. But something we need to understand about that alliance is that this alliance was meant to isolate France, right? Because it was meant to actually be a union between three different large-scale empires, right? If you want to write this down real quick, next to where you have the three emperors right there, the three empires that were within this alliance was the German Empire, the Russian Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, right? Those three made up the alliance of three emperors, because three emperors, Kaiser Wilhelm I, Alexander III, and then also last but very not least, being Franz Joseph, are going to come together and sign this alliance agreement together to make sure that no one invades them and that they actually keep their military prowess in check, right? The problem is, though, is that a lot of people didn't see this going forward, this forthcoming issue, though. Otto von Bismarck was trying to make friends out of two people that didn't really particularly like each other very much, and that being Austria and Russia, all right? Russia and Austria were not massive fans of each other, all right? Due to the fact that literally the Russians supported that one important concept that we need to not remember whatsoever, that concept known as Pan-Slavism, right? Now, Pan-Slavism we talked about last unit, right? In Unit 7, when we discussed how Slavic nations are beginning to back one another, that they deserve self-autonomy, autonomy and self-determined governments and self-determined countries, right? Serbians are beginning to believe that they deserve a unified Serbian state. Croatians think the same thing. Bosnians, Bulgarians, all these other people out there, all these Slavic people believe that they deserve more, right? That they deserve countries all their own skis, right? Now, what we need to understand, though, going into it, is that Austria and Russia are going to disagree about this because Austria controls a lot of those people. Then their empire, they have the Hungarian, well, they're not Slavic. Hungarians aren't Slavic. Don't tell a Hungarian they're Slavic, all right? They have control over Croatia and Bosnia and a couple other areas that actually have Slavs inside of them, all right? Now, the thing about it, though, is that the Russians, being the big brother Slavic country, is like, hey, you ought to, like, let those people go. And they, like, try to look at, like, the hero in this whole sense. This right here, actually, is a political cartoon that's an allegorical war map from 1877 that shows the Avenger, right? And the Avenger is Alexander III and the Russian Empire coming in to slay the Ottoman Empire, the thing that used to control a large chunk of those Balkan states that had like Slavic countries inside of them. But notice really, really quickly that they're stabbing the Ottoman Empire to liberate those Slavic territories while the Austrians just look on right there, right? Still controlling a lot of those areas, right? So the thing about it, though, that's going to end up happening is this alliance is unstable, but it's an alliance but it's an alliance all the same, right? And all it really needs is somebody to come along and screw it up. And this idiot comes along and screws it up, right? About 15 years after this alliance was signed, it begins to dissolve quickly because of the newly crowned Kaiser of Germany, right? This is Wilhelm II, Kaiser Wilhelm I's son, right? He has a Hohenzollern as well, and he is inept. Like, the guy is not smart. Like, I really try my best to not look upon historical figures and judge their actions harshly, but this guy might be the one person that we could all just, like, point to and be like, World War I's his fault. That guy's fault. That one right there. This guy right there, it's all his fault, right? Kaiser Wilhelm II was, like, one, very emasculated, right? Because he actually had a dead arm that, like, hung by his side, literally, because it, like, got actually hurt whenever he was a child and stuff, and it, like, didn't move or have any feeling in it and everything like that. So he was a very odd-looking dude. He would, like, prop it up on a sword all the time to try and make it look like it wasn't that bad. But going into it, though, you have to understand that Kaiser Wilhelm is going to be the new Kaiser, and guess what he does to Otto von Bismarck? He actually did not like Bismarck, and he actually forced him to resign. Forced him to resign his position, and what ends up happening is because of this, that alliance of three emperors was never renewed, right? And so what ends up happening as well, Kaiser Wilhelm II cancels the part of the alliance with the Russians because he instead decides to side with the Austrians. Wait a minute. It's like there's like this scary thing in the background. Like, why do I feel like I'm about to be attacked by like this like thing? Because like, oh god, it's like the French shark who's gonna swoop in right now because he smells blood in the water. I don't care. That's a good joke. You need to eat me. Now, like, so France swoops in because of this and attacks from beneath the water and signs their own alliance with the Russians, right? Now putting Germany and the German Empire at a geographic disadvantage, right? They signed the Franco-Russian alliance in 1891, and they swooped in there to try and impugn the Germans very quickly. They also even built a bridge in Paris to celebrate this alliance. It's called the Pont d'Alexandre, which literally means the Bridge of Alexander III, because it celebrates the alliance that the Russians and the French actually signed together going into World War I, right? Now, the thing about it, though, is that the French are going to strike whenever the Germans were at their weakest, and going into it, though, we're going to continue this whole alliance system because we've got a couple other allies out there that we've got to get all wrapped up, right? Then what's going to happen is Kaiser Wilhelm gets into an arms race, right? Kaiser Wilhelm II is going to get into, some of you are, by the way, probably is like sitting there being like, but Mr. Terry, what happened to Otto von Bismarck in the long run, right? He actually ended up dying a few years later. By about 1898, he actually passes away from like natural causes and old age and stuff like that. And so now with him gone completely, Kaiser Wilhelm is the one that's actually in control of this ship. Well, the thing about it, speaking of ships, he actually gets into an arms race with the Brits, right? And they actually have a naval build-up race. And what ends up happening, though, is it's because of two particular boats, right? It's because of this boat that the British developed, right, that freaked a lot of people in the world out. It's known as the Dreadnought, right? Now, originally the Dreadnought was one boat. It was called the HMS Dreadnought, right? But it actually became a type of boat, right? A Dreadnought is a steam-powered battleship, right? And it's got huge, massive guns on top of it that are meant to be able to go anywhere in the world and destroy anything from the water, right? And so what the Germans decided to do is they were like, we're not going to let the Brits be the only ones that have these large-scale warships. We're going to build some of our own as well. And they end up in an arms race with each other, seeing who can build the most dreadnoughts the fastest. Well, the thing about it is the Brits are just better than you than this. The Industrial Revolution started in their area first, and also the Parliament backed the building of these dreadnoughts to employ people and give them more jobs. And so the British end up winning that arms race, right? And so the Germans had to pivot. And so what they pivoted to was building these bad boys instead, right? A little thing called a U-boat, right? Now, you know a U-boat is a submarine. Now, ironically enough, in World War I, a lot of people thought this was a terrible idea, right? They were like, oh, U-boats are not that good. Submarines aren't that good. They don't stay submerged very well. All it takes is a depth charge to force them to rise up. They don't have sonar, so they literally had to guide themselves with a periscope and stuff like that, and had to use, like, maps because they didn't actually have, like, radio frequency operations to be able to know exactly where they were going at first. They were like, you're navigating in the blind underwater. These are terrible boats, right? Funny thing about it is that the U-boat becomes probably the most important weapon of World War I by about 1915, right? Due to this thing called unrestricted submarine warfare, which keep that in the back of your mind. We'll talk about that later, right? But the Germans decided to build a bunch of U-boats instead. Now, why are they called U-boats, right? Well, they're called U-boats because the German word for a submarine is a Unterseeboot. Unterseeboot. Because if you actually look at the word, it's like Untersee. It means actually under the water boat. And what this is going to lead to, though, is the Entente Cordiale being signed between Britain and France, which is another alliance between the French and the British. And yet again, do you hear that in the background? That scary noise, that terrifying noise, that shark is out there yet again just waiting for the Germans to screw up, right? And he got him yet again. He like on top of him right there again because he is trying to gain as many allies as he can in case a war with Germany ever breaks out, right? Because they want to show it, they want to show it to him. They want to stick it to him as hard as they can because this actually is going to be a massive war that blows up because of this stuff, right? Now, France encourages Russia to then make the triumvirate complete and to sign an alliance with the Russians, right? And that's the Anglo-Russian alliance, effectively creating this thing called the Triple Entente. You know them better, though, as the Allies, right? Now, going into it, though, the Allies will be formed, and here's a little ironic fact about this whole thing as well. You'd really think that family wouldn't go to war with each other, because Queen Victoria, the reigning, queen of Great Britain during the later part of the 1800s, actually was related to all these leaders of state, right? This right here is George V, who will actually end up George V, who will actually end up becoming King of England after, 2 generations after. But his dad was there. He's a Saxe-Coburg line. There's a whole thing. But anyway, during World War I, George V was the grandson of Queen Victoria and the King of England, right? And then also another one of her grandsons is, again, of course, Kaiser Wilhelm. Kaiser Wilhelm is one of her grandkids, right? Like, you would think that these two first cousins wouldn't go to war with each other, but they ended up doing that. And then none other than Nicholas II Romanov, the Tsar of Russia by the time World War I breaks out, is her grandnephew. They're all directly related, and they end up all going to war with each other, which is absolutely wild, right? I just think that's a really fun fact to know. And the other causes of World War I include things like militarism, right? And these are our other main causes, right? Our MAIN causes, right? But as you can see, the alliances system and the alliance system is just on the precipice of breaking out into war at any minute whatsoever, right? And what ends up happening as well, that you need to write this down. Actually, do me a favor. Before you write that down, write this down. What ends up happening, though, in rebuttal to that, okay, what ends up happening is that the Germans sign alliances with Austria-Hungary and with Italy as well, okay? Now, with Italy as well, and they become what's known as the Central Powers, right? Now, weird little fact about it, I need you to put an asterisk next to Italy, because they ironically enough end up changing sides midway through the war, okay? But they do sign originally with Italy because actually the Ottomans don't get involved in the war until about October, and the war starts in August, right? So going into it, though, you have to understand the causes of the war, though, there are other 3 big ones, right? We just talked about the alliances, then we got the M, the I, and the N. Well, militarism is just when European countries began to frantically build up their militaries. That can be demonstrated actually also with that Anglo-German arms race, right? Because you can see in a political cartoon right here where they're trying to build up those dreadnoughts on their back as fast as they possibly can. And the Germans are trying to do it as well. And they literally is an Anglo-German arms race for naval supremacy, right? That is an aspect of militarism, when you are frantically building up your military so you have a larger and more dominant one than your neighbors and your rivals, right? Well, these military buildups are going to lead to tension, and it's going to leave the continent ripe for war, because if you have a giant military, people tend to want to use it, right? Now, another big one, though, is, of course, imperialism. Now, imperialism is going to lead to a competition, right? They're going to start competing with each other for certain colonies that provide resources to them, like petroleum and rubber and other goods that could be used for war, right? An example of this is the thing called the First Moroccan Crisis, which actually broke out in 1905, when literally the Kaiser Wilhelm tried to convince Morocco, right, an independent state, but actually directly tied to the French government. So it's a part of their imperial empire, but an independent state all the same, Germany tried to convince Morocco to leave France and come and join them instead, right? And so that is actually going to leave a very, very disgusting taste in people's mouth because it's an offshoot of imperialism, and it's going to drive a wedge even further between the Germans and the Brits and the French, right? And they actually don't even like pull this off. The Moroccans stay with the French and stuff like that, but again, this trying to gobble up a colony that's not yours is going to lead to some tension, right? Now, another big one, though, is nationalism, right? Now, nationalistic tension might actually be the second most important cause out of all these other, like, through. If I had to rank them, it goes alliances, nationalism, militarism, imperialism, right? Imperialism actually is much bigger when it actually comes down to it because it actually demonstrates where all these battles broke out. Now, nationalism and nationalistic tensions are holding over from the 1800s begin to exacerbate a lot of these old rivalries and create new tension, right? Because the original rivalry that led to this whole kerfuffle that's going to end up blowing up in everybody's face is just the one between France and Germany, but they started sucking everybody else into it as well, right? Now, this is going to lead to this area of Europe being known as the powder keg, right? Now, where that is called the Balkans. Now, let's talk really, really quickly about the imagery of a powder keg, right? Now, why they called it this in history is because a powder keg, what it is, okay, in essence, is a barrel full of gunpowder, right? And they're very unstable, and it takes just a little bit of something to set it off into a full explosion, right? Europe's powder keg, that will be the instance of where this like war kind of breaks out and how it goes from a local war to a huge worldwide war, is exacerbated by all these other issues, right? But the nationalistic tension is going to lead to this concept of it being known as the powder keg. And why was it called the powder keg? A lot of it relates back to that pan-Slavism stuff, which is directly related to nationalism, right? Because after the Balkan Wars, right? So there were these things called the Balkan Wars where the Ottoman Empire is beginning to die, right? It's like starting to die out and the Ottomans are starting to shrivel up and go away. Well, a lot of these little like Balkan nations are going to fight wars against the Ottoman Empire to try and liberate themselves, right? For example, Serbia does this, Montenegro does this, the Bulgarians and the Romanians do this as well, and the Greeks actually come in to help aid them in this entire war. Well, the Balkan Wars end up leading to some of these Slavic countries, like the Serbians, having their own country. Well, the problem is, though, is not all Serbians live in Serbia. Some of them still live in this place called Bosnia, right? And they want those people to be liberated as well. In this pan-Slavic idea, they're like, we are Slavic and they are Slavic, so they should be liberated as well. And they should be a self-determined country, all their own skis, and not be controlled by anybody else. The problem is, though, is you got people like Austria-Hungary who want to keep them. They want to keep the Croatians. They want to keep the Bosnians. They want to keep all of those people, the Bohemians, which is now the modern-day Czech Republic. They want to keep them under their control because literally, how do you make money when you have an empire? You control more people, more industries, more power, more funds, more territory, more everything, right? The Austrians want to keep it, though, okay? And the thing about it, though, is a lot of people are very well aware that if Serbia ends up going to war with Austria, that Russia will come in and back them up, right? And if they come in and back them up, then Austria declares war on Russia. That means Germany will then declare war on Russia. And then you see how these alliances will then break out because the dying Ottoman Empire, pan-Slavism, and all this other stuff is going to lead places like Serbia and Bosnia to push for their own determinations. And everybody's confident that if a war is going to break out, that's where it's going to start, right? Like, so yeah, it's going to start in a localized territory in the Balkans, but it will spill out into the entire continent as well because of this like very, very like spider web-like system of alliances. But we're going to cut it off right there, and then tomorrow we're going to talk about one of my favorite stories, how the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand ends up leading to this entire big war that ends up claiming the lives of 10 million people. So I'll see y'all soon.